The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen as Adam sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through emails on his tablet. Mornings were his quiet time, before the chaos of the restaurant, before the demands of employees, suppliers, and customers. It was the one time of day he could sit back, sip his coffee, and just breathe, until Brielle stormed in. His 18-year-old stepdaughter, dressed in an oversized hoodie and pajama shorts, barely glanced at him as she yanked the fridge open and pulled out a carton of orange juice. She poured herself a glass, leaving the carton on the counter, then turned to the stove and grabbed the scrambled eggs Nicole had made earlier. Without so much as a good morning, she loaded her plate and made a beeline for the living room, leaving the kitchen a mess in her wake. Adam exhaled, setting his coffee down. "Brielle, clean up after yourself." Brielle froze in the doorway, then turned slowly, her expression a mix of irritation and disbelief. "What?" Adam gestured to the counter, where the juice carton sat next to the half-empty pan of eggs. "The mess. Put the juice back, rinse the pan." She scoffed. "Are you serious?" He raised an eyebrow. "Yes." Brielle rolled her eyes so hard it was a miracle they didn't get stuck. "You're not my father, so do not tell me what to do." Silence. Adam stared at her, the words hitting him harder than he expected. Not because they were shocking. No, he had always known where he stood in Brielle's life. But the casual cruelty of it. The sheer entitlement in her voice, like he was some nobody trying to assert authority over her. His grip on his coffee mug tightened. For 5 years, he had been the one putting food on the table, paying for her private school, covering the cost of braces, vacations, designer handbags, everything. And yet, here she was, speaking to him like he was some irrelevant afterthought. Brielle, oblivious to his growing irritation, flipped her hair over her shoulder and walked off toward the living room, leaving the mess behind as if she had won something. Adam's jaw clenched. It wasn't about the juice or the eggs. It wasn't even about the mess. It was the disrespect, the way she had so easily dismissed him. Something inside him shifted. He had spent years giving, providing, making sure Brielle never wanted for anything. And for what? So she could treat him like an ATM with no authority? So she could remind him, at her convenience, that he was nobody? Not anymore. He pushed back his chair and stood, his movements slow and deliberate. His heart wasn't racing. No, this wasn't anger. This was clarity. He walked to the doorway and leaned against the frame, watching as Brielle sprawled across the couch, her phone in one hand, her fork in the other as she scrolled through social media, completely unbothered. "Brielle," he said, his voice calm. She didn't even glance up. "What?" "Come clean the kitchen." She let out an exaggerated sigh, tossing her phone onto the couch. "Oh my God, I literally just sat down." "Not my problem," Adam said. "You made the mess. Clean it." She finally looked up at him, her irritation morphing into outrage. "Are you being serious right now?" "Yes." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "You're overreacting. It's not even that big of a deal." Adam tilted his head slightly. "Not cleaning up after yourself? Or telling me I'm not your father when I ask you to do something reasonable?" Brielle blinked, caught off guard. But she recovered quickly, rolling her eyes. "You're not." There it was again. That dismissive tone. That absolute certainty that she could say whatever she wanted without consequence. Adam's expression didn't change. He simply nodded, a small, knowing gesture. "Got it," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Then, he turned and walked away, heading back to the kitchen, to his coffee, to his quiet morning. But something was different now. That moment, those words, had shifted something fundamental. This wasn't just about a single instance of disrespect. It was about the pattern, the entitlement, the years of providing without appreciation. And for the first time, Adam realized something with absolute certainty. He was done. Adam exhaled slowly, gripping the coffee mug a little tighter as he stared down at the printed college expenses Brielle had so casually dropped in front of him. Belmont University. For years. $457,000. His eyes skimmed over the breakdown. Nearly $300,000 in tuition, an $80,000 luxury dorm, $37,000 in spending money. It was so absurd that he almost laughed. But what really got him, what really made his blood pressure rise, was the way Brielle stood there, arms crossed, expression smug, like she had just ordered a meal at a restaurant and was waiting for him to pick up the check. Adam slowly lifted his gaze from the paper. You expect me to pay for all of this? Brielle flipped her hair over her shoulder. Yeah, Mom said you would. Adam's grip on the paper tightened. He turned his head toward Nicole, expecting, no, hoping, to see some sort of hesitation on her face. Some indication that this was not what she had meant, that Brielle had misunderstood. But Nicole just sat at the counter, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, her eyes glued to the surface of the liquid inside. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't even looking at him. His stomach twisted. Nicole, he said, his voice controlled but tight. Did you really tell her I'd pay for this? She finally exhaled and lifted her gaze, but there was no guilt there. Just expectation. She needs a good education, Adam. He let out a dry laugh. A good education doesn't require a luxury dorm and 40 grand in spending money. Nicole pursed her lips. You own a restaurant. You can afford it. Adam's jaw clenched. There it was. You can afford it. Not, can we sit down and talk about this? Not, let's figure this out together. Just a demand, dressed up as an expectation. He turned back to Brielle. You applying for any scholarships? She actually wrinkled her nose, like the very idea disgusted her. No, that's for people who need help. Adam blinked. You don't think a nearly $500,000 tuition bill is something that requires help? She shrugged. Not when you can afford it. His chest tightened. He had busted his ass for years to build his restaurant, to create something stable. The hours, the sacrifices, all of it, so he could provide a good life for his family. But Brielle didn't see that. She didn't see the early mornings, the stress of payroll, the nights he came home exhausted but still tried to show up for family dinners. She just saw money. His money. And in her mind, she was entitled to it. Adam set the paper down, folding his hands over it as he looked at her. What about a job? Brielle actually laughed. Why would I need a job? A slow, simmering anger settled deep in his chest. Nicole shifted in her seat, her shoulders tensing slightly. Adam, she's going to school. She needs to focus on that. He raised an eyebrow. Plenty of students work while going to school. Brielle rolled her eyes. Yeah, because they have to. Adam's patience thinned. And what makes you different? She let out an exasperated sigh, like he was the crazy one. You literally have the money. Why would I get a job when you can just pay for everything? Adam stared at her, the sheer audacity of it almost numbing. He had always known Brielle was a little spoiled. But this was a whole other level. His fingers drummed against the table. Let me get this straight. You want me to cover everything. Tuition, dorm, spending money. Without a scholarship, without a job, without any effort on your part. Brielle grinned, like he was finally getting it. Exactly. His jaw tightened. He turned back to Nicole, waiting, practically begging, for her to step in, to say something reasonable. But she didn't. Instead, she sighed and said, Adam, she's right. This is something we should do for her. We. Like Nicole had contributed a single cent to this conversation. Adam let out a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Nicole, you do realize we're talking about almost $500,000, right? She waved a hand dismissively. You make good money. We can handle it. Adam let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. We don't make good money. I do. He stared at Nicole, something shifting in his mind, something solidifying. This wasn't just about college. It was about how they saw him. Not as a husband, not as a father figure, not even as a partner, just a bank account. And he was done playing that role. He exhaled through his nose, nodding slowly. All right. Nicole brightened. So you'll do it? Adam met her gaze, his expression unreadable. No. Brielle's face dropped. Wait, what? I said no. His voice was calm, controlled. I'm not paying for this. Brielle's jaw dropped. Are you kidding me? Nicole's expression darkened. Adam, be serious. I am serious. His tone was firm, final. If Brielle wants to go to Belmont, she can apply for financial aid like everyone else. Or get a job. But I'm not shelling out $500,000 just because she expects me to. Brielle let out a high-pitched scoff, crossing her arms. This is so unfair. You literally have the money. You just don't want to help me. Adam tilted his head. That's funny. Because earlier today, you made it very clear that I'm not your father. Brielle froze. Her face paled slightly, as if she was only just now realizing the impact of her words from that morning. Nicole opened her mouth, but Adam held up a hand. No, I want to hear from Brielle. If I'm not your father, then what am I? Silence. Brielle's lips parted, but nothing came out. Because she knew. She knew exactly what she had done. Adam exhaled, standing up from the table. Let me be clear. I'm not your father. I'm not your bank account. I'm not your unlimited resource. He turned to Nicole. And I'm not going to be manipulated into throwing away my hard-earned money, just so Brielle can live in luxury while doing nothing to earn it. Nicole's expression hardened. So that's it. You're just going to abandon her. Adam let out a slow, controlled breath. No, Nicole. I'm just finally setting boundaries. And with that, he picked up his coffee, turned, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving them both speechless. Adam stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window as the sun cast long shadows across the backyard. The coffee in his mug had gone cold, but he didn't care. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the morning's events over and over again. You're not my father, so do not tell me what to do. Mom said you'd cover it. You literally have the money. Why would I get a job when you can just pay for everything? Each statement echoed like a hammer striking steel, reinforcing what he had come to realize. Brielle had no respect for him. None. And worse, Nicole had enabled it. For years, he had shouldered the financial burden of this family, paying for everything without complaint. He had done it willingly, believing he was doing what was best for his wife and stepdaughter. But now, after everything, he could see it for what it really was. They had never seen him as a father figure. He was just a wallet, a walking bank account to be tapped whenever they needed something. And now that he had drawn a line, they were furious. A loud ding from his phone broke his thoughts. He pulled it out and sighed. It was a message from Brielle. Brielle, Mom and I are talking to Dad today. He said he might be able to help with tuition. At least he actually cares about me. Adam exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Of course. Every time Brielle didn't get what she wanted from Adam, she ran straight to Shane, her real father. The same Shane who had not paid a single dime toward her upbringing since 2017. The same Shane who came and went from her life like a seasonal storm, making big promises and never following through. But that didn't matter to Brielle. She idolized him. Because Shane was fun. Shane was exciting. And unlike Adam, Shane didn't expect anything from her. All he had to do was roll in, say a few sweet words, and Brielle clung to them like gospel. Adam knew exactly how this conversation with Shane would go. He'd puff up his chest, act like the hero, tell Brielle everything she wanted to hear. And then, he'd disappear. Again. It was the same cycle, over and over. Adam had seen it for years. But Brielle? She refused to. Hours later, Adam was in his office at the restaurant, reviewing inventory reports, when his phone vibrated again. Brielle, guess what? Dad said he's getting me a car. A Tesla Model 3. He said I deserve it after everything I've been through. Adam rubbed his temples. Here we go. Another promise. Another shiny object dangled in front of her to keep her loyalty. Adam had been the one paying for everything. The braces, the private school tuition, the trips, the clothes, the very roof over her head. But Shane shows up once in a blue moon, waves a flashy promise in front of her, and suddenly he's the best dad in the world? Adam knew how this story ended. Shane would never buy that car. He'd make excuses. He'd stall. He'd go silent. And when Brielle eventually realized the car wasn't coming, she'd run back to Adam, expecting him to fix it. He sighed and put his phone down, shaking his head. Not this time. A week passed. Then two. And then, one afternoon, Adam got a text he had been expecting. Brielle, Dad is such a liar. I can't believe him. Adam didn't reply. 2 minutes later, another text. Brielle, he's ignoring my calls. WTF? Still, Adam said nothing. A third message came through. Brielle, he was never going to get me the Tesla, was he? Adam exhaled, resting his phone on his desk. There it was. The moment of realization. For years, Brielle had chosen fantasy over reality. She had idolized a man who had never put in the effort. A man who had never sacrificed for her. A man who had never been the one to actually take care of her. And now? Now she was finally seeing it. But Adam wasn't going to gloat. He wasn't going to rub it in her face. Because none of this had ever been about getting credit. It had always been about teaching her the difference between real effort and empty promises. And if she was finally learning that lesson, then maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for her. But that didn't mean he was going to fix it for her. Not anymore. She had made her choices. Now, she had to live with them. And Adam? Adam was finally learning how to let go. The air buzzed with laughter, the clink of glasses, and the steady beat of music playing softly over the speakers. Adam stood near the bar, sipping his drink as he surveyed the venue. The decorations were perfect, the lighting warm and elegant, the catering top tier. He had spared no expense in making sure Brielle's 18th birthday was exactly what she wanted: extravagant, high class, and unforgettable. And yet, standing there, watching the sea of well-dressed teenagers dancing and taking selfies, Adam felt nothing. This wasn't for him. This wasn't even for Brielle, not really. This was a performance, a grand production, put on for social media, designed to make her look like she was living some perfect fantasy life. But Adam had played his part. He had paid for it all: the venue, the DJ, the designer cake, the decorations. Because that's what was expected of him. Not a thank you, not a word of appreciation, just expectation. And he had delivered. He took another sip of his drink, exhaling slowly. But he was done. This would be the last time. Brielle floated through the party like royalty, wearing a designer dress Adam had bought, laughing with friends who barely acknowledged him. Adam stood near the entrance, watching from a distance, content to stay on the sidelines. And then Shane walked in. Adam's grip on his glass tightened. He hadn't even been sure the guy would show. Shane was inconsistent at best, a complete no-show at worst. But tonight, he had arrived in full performance mode. Wearing a cheap knockoff Rolex, a blazer that looked one size too small, and a smirk that made Adam's stomach turn. The moment Brielle spotted him, her face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "Dad," she squealed, rushing across the room. Adam watched as she threw her arms around Shane's neck, clinging to him like he had just returned from war, as if he hadn't been ignoring her calls for weeks, as if he hadn't just lied to her about buying her a Tesla, as if he hadn't been the most inconsistent, unreliable presence in her life. And yet, none of that mattered to her, because Shane was fun. Shane was charming. And tonight, Shane was about to steal the show. An hour passed, and the party was in full swing. Adam had kept his distance, choosing to enjoy his drink rather than engage in Shane's theatrics. But then, Shane grabbed the microphone. The music cut off, and the crowd turned toward the stage. Brielle stood next to Shane, beaming, her eyes wide with excitement. Adam's stomach sank. This was about to be a disaster. Shane cleared his throat, swaying slightly. Adam didn't need to be close to smell the alcohol on his breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," Shane slurred, "I just want to say, happy birthday to my baby girl, Brielle." The crowd cheered. Adam exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Here we go. And guess what?" Shane continued, voice loud, overly dramatic. "I'm buying her a Tesla." The room exploded. Teenagers screamed. The DJ let out an excited OSH*T. Brielle's jaw dropped. "Oh my God, really?" she screeched, clapping her hands together like she had just won the lottery. Adam just closed his eyes. This clown, this unemployed, broke, unreliable mess had just promised his daughter the one thing he had already failed to deliver. And Brielle? She had fallen for it. Again. But then, it got worse. Shane, caught up in the moment, raised his champagne glass. "T.O. Brielle," he shouted. And then, he threw the glass. Right at the wall. It shattered on impact, shards flying across the floor. The entire room fell silent. The DJ cut the music. The teenagers froze. And Brielle? Her entire face changed. She went from glowing with excitement to pure mortification in seconds. Shane, swaying slightly, squinted at the broken glass like he had just realized what he had done. "Oh, my bad," he muttered. The damage was already done. Phones were out. People were recording. Brielle's birthday party had just turned into a viral meme in the making. Adam didn't stay to see what happened next. He didn't wait for Brielle's meltdown. Didn't stick around to hear the whispering, the laughter, the inevitable fallout. He just turned and walked out. Because tonight had proven everything. He had spent 5 years trying to be a father figure, trying to earn respect, trying to be the responsible one, while Shane waltzed in and out of Brielle's life like a cheap magician. And now he was done. As he stepped out into the cool night air, he pulled out his phone. A text from Nicole popped up. "Nicole, Adam, where are you?" He didn't answer. For the first time in a long time, he felt something different. Freedom. The morning after the party, the house was eerily quiet. Adam sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the local news on his phone, half expecting to see Brielle's birthday disaster trending. It hadn't hit the mainstream yet, but it was only a matter of time. The internet never forgets. The moment Shane had drunkenly hurled that champagne glass, the energy in the room had shifted. The teenagers had gone from cheering to recording. By the time Adam had walked out, he had already seen the glow of dozens of phones capturing the embarrassment in real time. And Brielle? She had been frozen in place, her face shifting from excitement to horror as she realized just how bad this was going to be. Adam had no sympathy for her, because this was the moment she had chosen. She had sided with Shane every time. She had idolized him, despite his pattern of failure. And now, she had learned the hard way what kind of man he really was. Adam took another sip of coffee, glancing at his phone as a notification popped up. A text from Nicole. "Nicole, we need to talk." He exhaled, setting the phone down. No, he didn't owe Nicole a conversation. Not after last night. Not after she had sat back in silence while Brielle disrespected him. Not after she had expected him to pay nearly $500,000 for a daughter who saw him as nothing more than an ATM. Nicole had made her choices, and now she could live with them. Footsteps thudded down the stairs. A moment later, Brielle stormed into the kitchen, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide with panic. "You left," she snapped, her voice sharp with accusation. Adam raised an eyebrow, taking another sip of his coffee. "Yeah, I did." Brielle scoffed. "You just walked out? After everything?" Adam set his cup down. "What exactly was I supposed to stay for, Brielle? To watch your father humiliate himself? To watch you act like he just bought you the moon, only for him to embarrass you in front of everyone?" Her jaw tightened. "You don't get it." "I get it perfectly," Adam said evenly. "I get that you've spent years putting your father on a pedestal, ignoring every single red flag while treating me like I'm nothing." He leaned back in his chair. "I get that you were so sure he was going to come through for you. And now that he's embarrassed you, now that your party is a laughingstock, now that the internet is clowning you, suddenly, you want to talk." Brielle's hands curled into fists. "You should have stopped him." Adam blinked, then let out a low laugh. "Excuse me. If you hadn't been there, Dad wouldn't have gotten so." She gestured wildly, struggling for words. "Drunk?" "Unhinged," Adam offered. Her lips pressed into a thin line. He tilted his head, amusement flickering in his gaze. "Are you actually blaming me for his behavior?" Brielle's jaw tightened. "If you weren't there, he wouldn't have felt the need to." Adam held up a hand. "Stop. Right there." His voice was calm, but the edge in it made her pause. "You're about to say something really, really stupid, and I'd advise you to think carefully before you do." Silence. Brielle swallowed hard, looking away. Adam nodded. "That's what I thought." She shifted uncomfortably, arms crossed. I just don't get why you left." Mom said. "Your mother," Adam cut in, his voice cool, "enabled this." Brielle's eyes snapped to his. Adam leaned forward slightly. "Your mother sat back and let you believe Shane was a good father. She let you talk down to me. She let you believe you could treat me like an ATM and expect me to just accept it. And when your dad made a fool of himself last night, she said nothing. So forgive me if I don't really care about what she has to say right now." Brielle's fingers tightened around her phone. "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did," Adam interrupted. "You meant every single word. You meant it when you told me I wasn't your father. You meant it when you said you wouldn't get a job because I could just pay for everything. You meant it every time you ran to Shane instead of me." He exhaled slowly. "And now, you have to deal with what that actually means." Silence. Brielle's lips trembled slightly. For the first time, Adam saw something real in her expression. Not anger, not entitlement, not smugness, just realization. She had pushed too far, and Adam wasn't coming back from it. A moment later, Nicole walked in. She looked tired, her hair messy, dark circles under her eyes. She paused when she saw them sitting at the table, her gaze flicking between them. Then she sighed. "Adam, can we talk?" Adam picked up his coffee and took another slow sip. "I don't see the point." Nicole frowned. "You left the party." "Yes, I did," Adam said simply. "You embarrassed Brielle." Adam raised an eyebrow. "You mean Shane embarrassed Brielle?" Nicole exhaled sharply. "That's not the point." "It's exactly the point," Adam interrupted, his patience wearing thin. He gestured toward Brielle. She put all her faith in Shane. She ignored every red flag. And then, when he humiliated her in front of everyone, somehow, you're trying to pin it on me. He let out a dry laugh. "Unbelievable." Nicole's jaw tightened. Adam, please. Let's not do this right now. Do what, Nicole? His voice was cool, steady. Talk about the truth. Acknowledge that I have been treated like nothing in this family. He exhaled, shaking his head. No, we are doing this right now. Nicole hesitated. Look, I know things got out of hand last night, but what? Adam cut in. You're about to ask me to fix this, aren't you? She didn't respond. And that silence? It was all the confirmation Adam needed. He set his coffee down and stood up. No. Nicole blinked. What? No. Adam repeated. I'm not fixing this. I'm not apologizing for walking out of that disaster. I'm not pretending this is just a small misunderstanding. And I'm definitely not pretending that everything is fine. Nicole's lips parted. Adam, we're done, he said, voice firm. Her breath hitched. What do you mean? Adam exhaled, glancing at Brielle, who was still frozen, her phone gripped in her hands, then back at Nicole. I mean, he said slowly, I'm done with all of this. And with that, he walked out of the kitchen. Because for the first time in his life, he meant it. Adam stood in his office at the restaurant, hands pressed against the mahogany desk, staring down at the piece of paper in front of him. Belmont University tuition statement, $457,000. The audacity of it was almost amusing. Almost. He had spent the last 5 years doing everything in his power to ensure Brielle had a comfortable life. More than comfortable. She had never wanted for anything. Every vacation, every designer handbag, every luxury she had paraded on social media had come from his hard-earned money. And yet, here she was, shoving an outrageous bill in his face like he was some kind of bottomless ATM. Adam had been patient. Too patient. He had overlooked the small signs, the dismissive attitude, the entitlement, the clear lack of gratitude. He had excused it as teenage immaturity, as Nicole's permissiveness, as something she would eventually grow out of. But now, Brielle was an adult. And if she wanted to be treated like one, it was time for her to face the real world. That evening, Adam arrived home to find Nicole and Brielle waiting for him in the living room. The tension was immediate. Nicole's arms were crossed, her expression carefully neutral, but Adam could see the thinly veiled frustration in her eyes. Brielle, on the other hand, looked smug, confident, like she had already won whatever argument was about to happen. Adam didn't sit. He didn't even take off his jacket. Instead, he walked to the center of the room and set the tuition bill on the coffee table. The room fell silent. Nicole was the first to speak. Adam, no, he interrupted, his voice calm but firm. Let's cut straight to it. You're expecting me to pay nearly $500,000 for Brielle to go to college. What? Brielle scoffed. Because you can afford it. Adam's jaw tightened. He had been expecting that answer, but hearing it out loud still made something inside him snap. He turned to Nicole. And you agree with this? Nicole sighed, rubbing her temples. Adam, you know we've always planned for Brielle to have the best opportunities. Belmont is one of the top universities in the country. That's not what I asked. His voice was low, controlled. I asked if you actually believe I should be responsible for paying for this. Nicole hesitated, just for a second, and that second told Adam everything. Nicole had always assumed he would cave, that he would be the provider, no questions asked, that he would be the one to sacrifice, while Brielle reaped the rewards. And suddenly, he was tired. So tired. He turned back to Brielle. You remember what you said to me a few days ago? His voice was calm. Even. Brielle frowned. What? Adam crossed his arms. You told me, and I quote, "You're not my father, so do not tell me what to do." The smugness cracked. Nicole shifted uncomfortably. Adam, let's not. No, his tone cut through the air like a blade. Let's absolutely talk about it. He turned to Brielle. You've spent years reminding me that I'm not your father. You've made it painfully clear that you see me as nothing more than your mom's husband. Brielle's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because she knew it was true. Adam took a slow breath. So, tell me, why should I pay for your college? Brielle blinked. Because that's what a dad does. Adam laughed. A low, humorless sound. A dad? Now I'm a dad. He shook his head. No, Brielle. I'm not your dad. You made sure of that. Nicole's expression darkened. Adam, that's not fair. Adam turned to her. Eyes sharp. You're right. It's not fair. It's not fair that I've spent 5 years supporting a child who treats me like a stranger. It's not fair that I've paid for every want, every luxury. while she's given me nothing but disrespect. And it's certainly not fair that you expect me to shell out nearly $500,000 just because you think I should." Nicole's mouth opened, then closed. She had nothing. Brielle, however, was not done. "You're being dramatic," she huffed, crossing her arms. "You literally own a restaurant. It's not like you can't afford it." Adam exhaled slowly, tilting his head. "Let's say I do pay for it. What's stopping you from cutting me off the second you graduate?" Brielle frowned. "What?" Adam took a slow step forward. "Let's be real. You don't respect me. You don't even like me. So what happens after I drop $500,000 on your education? Do I magically become dad? Or do you continue treating me like I don't exist?" Brielle's mouth opened, then snapped shut. She had nothing, because she knew the answer. She had never seen Adam as family, just a resource. And now, that resource was gone. Nicole panicked. "Adam, please, let's be reasonable." Adam stared at her, and in that moment, he realized something. Nicole had never had his back. Not once. She had sat back, silent, every time Brielle disrespected him. She had expected him to be the sole provider, but never the parent. She had let him take on every responsibility, while giving him none of the authority. And now, when he was finally putting his foot down, she was choosing Brielle over him. Adam let out a slow breath. And then he spoke. "Okay," he said simply. Nicole frowned. "Okay." Adam turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You said if I don't pay, this marriage is over. So okay." Nicole's face drained of color. "What?" Adam exhaled, his voice calm. "We're getting divorced." Brielle's eyes widened. Nicole staggered back, like she had been physically struck. She had never expected him to call her bluff. Adam reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and scrolled through his contacts. Then he pressed dial. The line rang once, twice. Then, "Hey, John," Adam said, his tone businesslike. "Yeah, I need to schedule a meeting with you." "No, not about the restaurant. I need a divorce lawyer." Nicole let out a sharp gasp. "Adam, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," he said, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "This isn't a marriage. It's a business arrangement, and I'm done being the one funding it." Nicole looked at Brielle, desperation in her eyes. But Brielle, for the first time ever, she looked afraid, because she had pushed too far. And Adam? Adam was finally walking away. As he turned toward the door, he paused, glancing over his shoulder. "You were right, Brielle," he said, his voice almost calm. "I'm not your father. And now, I never have to be." And with that, he walked out. For the first time in years, he felt something new. Freedom. Adam stood outside, inhaling deeply as the cool evening air filled his lungs. The weight on his chest, the pressure, the resentment, the years of being taken for granted, was lifting. It was strange, almost surreal, how quickly everything had unraveled. But the truth was, it had been unraveling for years. This wasn't just about Brielle's college tuition. This wasn't just about one spoiled demand. This was about everything. The years of silent expectations, the constant one-sided sacrifices, the way he had been treated like a resource rather than a husband, rather than a parent. And now? Now he was done. He walked toward his car, his phone still clenched in his hand from the call with his lawyer. The reality of what he had just done settled in his chest, not with regret, but with something close to relief. Nicole had thought she could manipulate him, that she could use guilt and obligation to push him into funding Brielle's college dreams. She had never considered that he might simply say no. She had never considered that he might be willing to walk away. And Brielle? She had spent years treating him like an outsider, reminding him that he wasn't her real dad. But the second she needed something, she had expected him to step up. She had never thought she would lose that safety net. And now? She was panicking. Adam pulled out of the driveway, gripping the steering wheel tightly as he drove into town. His thoughts raced, but he kept coming back to the same realization. He had wasted years trying to be what this family wanted him to be. A provider, a stability net, a financial cushion, but never a father, never a partner. And that was over. Instead of heading straight to his lawyer's office, Adam found himself pulling into a quiet diner, one of those old-fashioned places with neon lights and a worn-out jukebox in the corner. The kind of place that felt real, where people weren't obsessed with appearances or entitlement. He needed a moment to sit, to breathe, to process. He slid into a booth, ordered a black coffee, and stared out the window. For the first time in years, he wasn't rushing to fix something. He wasn't responsible for anyone else's happiness. It felt strange, but it also felt good. His phone buzzed. He glanced down, expecting another angry message from Nicole or Brielle. Instead, it was his lawyer, John. "John, got your message. Let's set up a time to meet." "You sure about this?" Adam exhaled. He thought about everything that had led him to this point. The disrespect, the entitlement, the utter lack of appreciation. He thought about how Nicole had given him an ultimatum, fully believing that he would back down. He thought about Brielle's smugness, her expectation that he would pay her way through life just because he had the means to. And then, he thought about freedom. "Adam, yeah, I'm sure. Let's move forward." The waitress brought his coffee, offering him a warm smile. "Rough night." Adam let out a small chuckle. "You could say that." She nodded knowingly. "Well, at least you've got coffee." He smiled, lifting the cup. "That's true." And as he took the first sip, he realized something. For the first time in years, he wasn't sitting at a dinner table filled with expectations. For the first time, he wasn't chasing approval. He was just here, in this moment, with no obligations except the ones he chose. And it felt damn good. Meanwhile, back at the house, chaos had erupted. Brielle paced the living room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "He's not serious," she muttered, shaking her head. "He wouldn't just leave." Nicole sat on the couch, her hands buried in her hair. "He called a lawyer, Brielle. So? Maybe he's just trying to scare us." Nicole lifted her head, her eyes filled with something Brielle had never seen before. Panic. "He's not trying to scare us," Nicole whispered. "He's actually done." Brielle's stomach twisted. She had pushed too far. And now, the man who had funded her life, her lifestyle, her future, was walking away. Over the next few days, Adam barely responded to their calls or texts. Nicole tried everything: apologies, guilt trips, even a half-hearted promise to change. Brielle? She was still in denial. She refused to believe that Adam would actually follow through. Because that would mean her life was about to change. That would mean no Belmont University, no luxury dorm, no endless stream of spending money. And she wasn't ready for that reality. But reality came anyway. 3 weeks later, the divorce papers were officially filed. Nicole received the news first. And when she saw the terms, she froze. The prenup Adam had signed before their marriage was airtight. Nicole was leaving with nothing. No spousal support. No claim to his restaurant. No financial backing. And Brielle? Brielle was on her own. The morning after the papers were served, Brielle sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. She had called Shane 5 times. No answer. She had sent text after text. No response. Her real dad, the man she had always defended, idolized, chosen over Adam, was gone. No Tesla. No tuition money. No grand promises. Just silence. For the first time, true panic settled in her chest. She had assumed Adam would always be there. She had assumed she could treat him however she wanted and still get whatever she needed. She had assumed that he would never actually leave. But now, she was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a future she had never prepared for. Because the man who had held everything together was gone. And Adam was sitting in his lawyer's office, signing the last of the paperwork, feeling lighter than he had in years. Because for the first time in a long time, his life was his own again. Adam sat in his lawyer's office, a pen in his hand, the final paperwork resting in front of him. He exhaled slowly, staring at the crisp legal documents that severed the last tie he had to Nicole and Brielle. This was it. The final step. No more obligation, no more guilt, no more being treated like a walking bank account. John, his lawyer, leaned back in his chair, watching him carefully. "You sure about this?" Adam let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "I've never been more sure of anything." John nodded. "Then sign it." Adam didn't hesitate. He pressed the pen to the paper, signed his name in clean, deliberate strokes, and then set the pen down. It was done. And for the first time in years, he felt free. Meanwhile, at the house, chaos was unfolding. Nicole sat at the dining table, staring blankly at the divorce papers that had just been delivered. She had read them 3 times. Each time, she hoped she had missed something. Some loophole. Some small oversight that would mean Adam still owed her something. But there was nothing. The prenup was airtight. No alimony. No claim to the restaurant. Nothing. And then there was Brielle. She was pacing, her phone clutched in her hand, her expression shifting between panic and anger. "This is insane," she muttered. "He's not actually going through with this. He wouldn't just leave us like this." Nicole swallowed hard. "He already did." Brielle stopped pacing, her arms tightening around herself. "Well, what do we do?" Nicole didn't answer. Because for the first time, she didn't have an answer. For years, Adam had been the one to take care of everything. The house, the bills, Brielle's lifestyle. And now? Now it was gone. And Brielle, who had spent years mocking baristas and minimum wage workers, was about to find out exactly what it felt like to be on the other side of things. Adam wasted no time. The same day he signed the papers, he met with a realtor. It was time to sell the house. Nicole could find somewhere else to live. It wasn't his problem anymore. And as for Brielle, she was an adult now. She had made it very clear that Adam was not her father, so she could figure things out on her own. As he walked through the house one last time, he expected to feel something: regret, nostalgia, maybe even a hint of sadness. But all he felt was relief. This house had never been a home. Not really. It had been a place of expectation, of obligation, of endless, thankless sacrifices. And now? Now, it was just a building. And Adam was ready to walk away from it. A week later, the reality of the situation hit Brielle hard. She sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings on her phone, her stomach twisted in knots. She had never worked a day in her life. And now, she had no choice. Belmont University was off the table. Without Adam's money, there was no way she could afford it. Her real dad, Shane? Nowhere to be found. He had stopped responding to her texts, ignored her calls, and had completely ghosted her. She had spent years idolizing him, defending him, choosing him over Adam. And now? Now he was gone. Brielle stared at the screen, her chest tightening. I need money. But there was only one way to get it now. A job. A real job. And for someone who had spent years looking down on service workers, the reality of that was like a gut punch. But she had no choice. So, with shaking fingers, she opened the job application for Cafe Bliss, the same cafe she had once mocked baristas for messing up her coffee order, and started filling it out. Meanwhile, Adam was making his own plans. He had spent years living for everyone else. Now, it was time to live for himself. The house was selling fast, and he already had his eye on something new, a sleek, modern condo in the city, closer to the restaurant, with no excess space, no empty rooms, no reminders of the life he had left behind. And after that, maybe a vacation, maybe a new car, maybe whatever the hell he wanted, because for the first time in his life, he didn't have to ask anyone for permission. He was done being the provider for people who didn't appreciate him. He was done sacrificing his happiness for people who only saw him as a wallet. This was his time, and he wasn't going to waste a second of it. Adam stepped onto the balcony of his new condo, the city skyline stretching before him, glowing with the energy of a world that, for once, felt his. The crisp evening air brushed against his skin, carrying the scent of rain and opportunity. He exhaled slowly, taking in the moment. It had been just 3 months since the divorce papers had been signed. Just 3 months since he had walked away from a thankless marriage and a parasitic stepdaughter. And in those 3 months, everything had changed. Nicole had called him only once after the divorce was finalized. Not to apologize, not to make amends, but to ask for money. He had simply listened, his grip on the phone tightening as she made her plea. I just need a little help, Adam. You know, just until I get back on my feet. Back on her feet? Nicole had spent years living in luxury, his luxury. And now, with the prenup sealing off any claim she had to his money, she was finally experiencing what it was like to stand on her own. Adam had exhaled through his nose, let the silence stretch between them, then simply said, no. And then he had hung up. Brielle's downfall had been even more spectacular. The girl who once scoffed at minimum wage workers, who treated baristas like peasants, was now one of them. She had landed a job at Cafe Bliss, a trendy coffee shop downtown, and within weeks, her new reality had hit her hard. The same girl who used to whine about waiting 5 minutes for a caramel macchiato was now making them, for people who treated her the same way she used to treat others. And the best part? Adam had run into her once while stopping in for coffee. She had been behind the counter, wearing an apron, her face flushed with exhaustion as she scribbled on a cup. She had seen him. Their eyes had met. And for the first time ever, there was no smugness in her gaze. No entitlement. Just humiliation. Adam had simply smiled, picked up his coffee, and walked out without a word. Let her sit with it. Let her marinate in the consequences of her own actions. He owed her nothing. Now, as he stood on his balcony, sipping a $200 bottle of wine, Adam felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. There were no demands. No guilt trips. No constant expectation to sacrifice his happiness for people who didn't appreciate him. For the first time, his money was his own. His time was his own. And his life? His life was finally about him. At that exact moment, across town, Brielle sat in her tiny studio apartment, staring at the paycheck in her hands. $734. For 2 weeks of work. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't supposed to be her life. She was supposed to be at Belmont, living in a luxury dorm, spending weekends at rooftop parties, not waking up at 4 a.m. to steam milk for ungrateful customers. But the worst part? She had no one to blame but herself. Adam was gone. Her mother was struggling. And Shane? Shane had vanished completely, just like Adam had always said he would. Brielle swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she picked up her phone. She opened her contacts, scrolled down to Adam's name, hesitated, then typed, "Hey, can we talk?" And then she hit send. Adam saw the message flash across his phone. He read it, and then he simply smirked, took another sip of wine, and deleted it. His peace was too expensive to waste on people who had never valued him. Adam leaned back in his leather chair, a glass of deep red wine swirling in his hand. The city lights stretched out before him, shimmering in the darkness like a million tiny reminders of his newfound freedom. His phone lay on the table beside him, the screen dark, untouched. Brielle's text still lingered in his mind. "Hey, can we talk?" 3 months ago, that message might have made him pause, might have stirred something in him, obligation, duty, guilt. But now he felt nothing, because he knew exactly why she was reaching out. She wasn't messaging him because she missed him. She wasn't messaging him because she had suddenly realized his worth. She was messaging him because she had hit rock bottom. And the only thing Brielle had ever known how to do when she hit rock bottom was look for someone to pull her back up. Too bad for her, that safety net was gone. Adam exhaled slowly, setting the glass down with a quiet clink. He picked up his phone, opened the message thread, hovered his finger over the keyboard. And then, he deleted it. No response. No reaction. Nothing. Because that was exactly what she deserved. Meanwhile, across town, Brielle stared at her phone, her stomach tightening with anxiety. No reply. Not even the dreaded read notification. She checked again. Nothing. She swallowed hard, setting her phone down on the tiny table in her cramped studio apartment. The walls felt too close, the silence too loud. For the first time in her entire life, she felt truly alone. Her mother was still struggling to keep up with rent. The luxurious life they had once lived, the designer bags, the weekly spa trips, the unlimited spending, were nothing but a distant memory. And Shane? Shane had been a ghost since the second he realized there was no money left to take from them. The same man she had idolized, the one she had always defended, had proved exactly what Adam had warned her about. He had never been real. Just a man who fed her lies and empty promises while Adam had been the one actually supporting her. And now the only real thing left was the harsh truth. She had pushed away the only man who had ever actually been there for her. And he was never coming back. Back at his condo, Adam poured himself another glass of wine, flipping through an online catalog of high-end sports cars. He wasn't a man who splurged on himself often, but now he deserved it. For years, every extra dollar had gone into his family. Vacations, Brielle's private school, Nicole's shopping sprees. Now his money was his own. His time was his own. His peace was his most valuable investment. And he had no interest in spending it on people who had never appreciated him. His phone buzzed. Another text. This time, from Nicole. Adam chuckled to himself, already knowing exactly what it would say before he even opened it. "Nicole, Adam, please. Can we just talk? We need to figure things out." Figure things out? He had already figured things out. He had figured out that for years, he had been nothing more than a provider to her. He had figured out that when the money stopped, so did her interest in keeping their marriage alive. He had figured out that no matter how much he had given, it had never been enough. And now, he figured out that he no longer cared. Adam smirked, leaned back in his chair, and blocked her number. He had already given them too much of his time. Across town, Brielle checked her phone again. Still no reply. Her throat tightened, a sinking feeling settling in her stomach. She had spent years believing she was untouchable, that no matter how she acted, no matter how much she pushed Adam away, he would always be there. Because that was what he did, right? He always took care of her. But now, she was facing a world without him. And for the first time ever, she realized. She had taken him for granted. And she had lost him forever. Adam took a slow sip of his wine, staring out at the city skyline. His phone was silent. And for the first time in years, it stayed that way. No demands. No guilt trips. No obligations. Just peace. And it was the best investment he had ever made.